Rand, you were our first guest, along with Will, so many years ago on this podcast. So, I mean, I haven't counted. I know many podcasts do. I probably should do that. But it's been probably 10 years since you've been on. But I'm excited to finally have you back.
Yeah, I'm thrilled to be here. Thanks for having me, Ross.
Yeah. I mean, you've got some great counter takes, good takes. They're all good takes, not that just the counter takes aren't bad, but about the state of search and content. So, I mean, great person to talk to, but beyond just like search and content, I mean, our industry generally has followed along on your journey over the years, rooted for you, hopefully, mostly. I've rooted for you. And you've put out some amazing content. I mean, your book is a great read, Lost and Founder. And I was thinking about it in prepping for this call that it's been like 5 years since that published, and you've got great observations on being a founder and a technology owner, and obviously all that turn tied to search. So clearly, curious reflecting back on that book, like what are your thoughts today about what you published? Any kind of like evolution of that? Where's your brain at on that?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this too. I have talked to some folks, including my old editor from Penguin Random House, about potentially doing a sequel, a follow-up to Lost and Founder. I'm kind of hoping, very much hoping to wait until the video game launches. For folks who don't know, I left Moz in 2018, started SparkToro that year. A few years later, 2020, 21, I started getting into the indie video game field, just getting obsessed with it personally. And then I actually started a project that became a company, Snack Bar Studio, which got funding last fall. And so now I kind of run these two different companies, SparkToro and Snack Bar Studio. And I'm hopeful that before I write this book, I can get the game out into the world and see if my theories of how marketing and content and B2C, which I've never done B2C software before, see if those theories work and how well, and then be able to write about those as well, because I think there'll be a lot of useful information for anyone in marketing, but also anyone in entrepreneurship in there. One of the lessons, this is in a micro way, Ross, but one of the micro lessons that I think I did not include in Lost and Founder that is, what am I going to say? It's a little bit in the favor of venture capital world. And I think this is one of the reasons it flew under my radar, right? Because a lot of Lost and Founder was critical of VCs, critical of institutional capital and sort of the returns that they seek and their models. And in fairness to them, I think one of the things I did not realize about building businesses in general, or operating in the capitalist world and in a free market economy, is that it is really powerful to ride a wave. And what I mean by that is Moz started helping people with SEO and SEO software in 2003, which was a phenomenal freaking time to get into that. When Moz launched its first piece of software, right, the first subscription in 2007, there was one other piece of SEO software on the internet, and that was the thing you had to download to your desktop computer and run, and then Google would rate limit your machine.
What tool was that? Don't even know that.
Web CEO. Do you remember Web CEO?
Yeah, I might that have been right before I started SEO, but go ahead. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah. So like, Moz had no competition, just none at all. And not only did it have no competition, it was in a field that was insanely hot. Google went public a couple years later. So the company just rode this wave of growth and adoption that is, vanishingly hard to find. And it rode a wave of growth and adoption in a field that nobody else wanted to enter, because I'm sure you'll remember this, SEO had a terrible reputation. People thought it was spam. They thought it was black hat. They thought it was manipulation. They thought that every time you post anything about SEO in any sort of, web developer technology forum from 2005 to probably even 2016, 17, a ton of software engineers would say, well, as soon as Google gets good enough, SEO will no longer be needed. And, here we are, right, in
Yeah.
2025, and, SEO has become standard. It basically went from the redheaded stepchild of the marketing industry to a primary use case for marketing that almost every business on the planet focuses on and has to focus on. Riding that wave was crazy. And, one of the things I realized with SparkToro that I think is interesting, and Ross, I know, you're an investor. We haven't caught up about like SparkToro's, sort of growth curve, but SparkToro had this rapid rise to kind of a 1.3 million dollar ARR. And then growth has been soft since then, like really hard to find. And I think one of the big reasons is there's no wave that's being created. Like
Yeah.
the concept behind SparkToro resonates with a certain group of people who care about their audiences, behaviors, and demographics, need to show that to their clients or their bosses, use it to inform their strategies and tactics. But there's a lot of people for whom doing audience research isn't a core part of their job, even if it would be very impactful for them. Their boss, their team, their client doesn't tell them to do it. It doesn't really have a name. It's not a category that people associate with marketing. And so it doesn't get a lot of investment. And that has been a really interesting learning for us that, we have to, me and Amanda and Casey have to create the wave of demand for a product. That's a hard thing to do as an individual human being.
Right. So tying back to VC, you're saying it had like a less positive thing. Like, is that just more empathy forming for that idea, or could you color back to that VC part? Yeah.
Yeah. Basically, I have an understanding, if not complete respect, I have an understanding of why venture capitalists pour tons of money into thousands of companies that are all in the same sector and sphere at the same time.
Yeah.
Because riding a wave is a powerful thing. And so, you look at VC investment the last 3 years, and the overwhelming majority in software has gone to AI. And I'm skeptical of that, right? That seems weird to a lot of outside observers, myself included. I'm like, really? Another AI tool to do, help with whatever, your legal services or your dentistry? I'm like, come on. How many of these could possibly succeed? And the answer is very, very few. But the VCs sort of realize that historically, when a wave appears, a couple of companies are going to ride it and become giants, and a bunch of them will acquire all the little companies or put them out of business. And their model works well with invest in 100 companies, 97 of them die, one's a hit, 2 of them return a little bit.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, I think I was a much smaller version of what Moz was, but in some ways we kind of rode a wave of like link building changing as Siege, and that was positive for us as well. The catch, I mean, not the catch, but it's like there's probably those people that pick it just because it's a wave, but they're not truly passionate about that thing, potentially.
Yeah,
right.
I mean, I think that's fine too. Like it.
Yeah.
I think it is completely reasonable to say, hey, there's a bunch of opportunity in this area. Can I go enter that area and find something that resonates with me and that I care about? Granted, there's also a lot of grifters. And I'm sure all of us receive tons of emails and LinkedIn requests and see 1,000 AI tools that are things you could just do with a prompt in ChatGPT yourself, or terrible use cases for AI. Audience research, for example, is a terrible use case for AI. You can go to ChatGPT or Gemini or any of these other tools and ask it, hey, tell me about the audience of dentists in Canada and give me their demographics and behaviors. And it'll give you output, but those are just words that frequently come after other words. If you put those in your reports, you can sound credible to a third party, but it is not accurate data. It's not data. It's just stereotypes. Like if you think about what a responses from an AI, especially a large language model AI, tool are. It's essentially just stereotyping. It's what did we find that commonly occurs on the web? Let's produce that in a format and phrasing that sounds credible to a human. They do a good job with this, but it is not a substitute for real data. If you were to say, hey, estimate how many visitors this website gets, you and I know that is completely different from going into your Google Analytics or whatever analytics tool you've got and seeing how many visitors you got last month. And it's not even similar to going to a SimilarWeb or a SEMrush and looking at the data for that website, right? A true estimate that comes from some methodology. ChatGPT is just going to say, yeah, here's a number that seems to commonly comport with other things that have appeared on the web about this. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, there's a name for some kind of bias or maybe it's the curse of knowledge or something. Is like
Mm.
the beginner. I don't know if you know what
Yeah,
I'm
yeah, yeah.
referring
I know
to.
what you're talking about. Yeah, the curse of knowledge.
Yeah, is it the curse of knowledge where you're maybe the term is like you're an advanced beginner. You might know enough to be dangerous, but you actually once you get past that stage, you realize how much you don't know. And
Yes,
so many
yes.
AI users are probably like putting a prompt in there and have the illusion that this is great because maybe they are an advanced beginner, but you can't know until you actually are that subject matter expert to know this is quite bad. Really, we can only do that with our own fields. But so
Yeah.
many people are doing these for an adjacent field, feeling like it feels good until they are that audience research expert or the SEO expert. You read that stuff and it's still quite bad.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that this wave of adoption that sort of the entire industry is riding, and honestly, a significant portion of um, humanity is riding. Right, ChatGPT it's in the top 10 most popular websites in the United States. Right, so it's obviously getting adopted by more than just technologists and entrepreneurs and stuff and marketers. But there are in my opinion, what's going to happen is there'll be sort of an adoption, like a fast adoption curve, and then people will slowly sort of figure out what they can really use it for and can't. As an example, you've probably seen tons of stories about like people using it for medical knowledge, right? So like, hey, I have these symptoms and I'm worried about these things. And actually, in fairness, I think that the models do a decent job with exploring medical conditions with you and providing pretty decent information because the model that they've built off the content on the web and what they've decided is trustworthy enough to index and use is pretty darn good. But
Yeah.
then people will apply that same logic to something like, hey, I need to go into the DMV and get my real ID, right? In order to fly, the United States is making it so that you have to use these new real IDs. You can't just use your old driver's license. And for
Right.
example,
Okay.
I've seen people, talking about online, like they went to the DMV and to get their real ID, and they presented what they thought was the correct paperwork because ChatGPT told them this is what you have to bring with you because the website is confusing. So they went to a large language model and they asked, and the people at the desk of the DMV are like, no, this is wrong. Come, make another appointment for 3 months from now. So people get frustrated and they realize, oh wait, a ChatGPT answer is not the answer. It's just, it will always give me an answer, but it
Oh
is
yeah.
not
Yeah.
it is not consistently correct enough to trust on these kinds of things. If you went to ChatGPT and said, hey, what time are all the flights from SeaTac to Denver? You would get a response. Is that accurate? Like you have to double check all that stuff, right? So I think slowly people are going to figure this stuff out. And then we'll see whether the wave of adoption turns into it'll turn into a subset of successful companies and businesses and use cases, and then a bunch of stuff will fail.
Yeah, makes sense. And when first couple times that happens, maybe the mood will change a little bit. It hasn't quite happened as of yet. You hit a theme that I thought was interesting to circle back to is just SEO's reputation and the idea. Just curious as someone who's like out outside the industry now, roughly, even though you're so connected to it still. Like, what do you think the current perception of search is right now? Are we like in the good graces? Is it a little less? People are going to hate on us on Hacker News? I'm not sure.
No. I mean, Hacker News is a good example of this. I saw a couple of show HN, the little threads where you show off on Hacker News a product that you've built. And some people had built like SEO tools for AI visibility, showed those off on Hacker News, and they, one of them made the front page. They got upvotes. They didn't get flagged. The responses were not critical. They were quite like, oh yeah, this looks pretty good. That is just light years away from what happened 10, 12 years ago. And I think essentially what happened is the world broadly came to the conclusion that SEO is a part of marketing. Search is a part of how people discover things on the internet. And of course, you would try to influence that if your job is to do marketing, and people don't really have the problem with it that they had before. There's no major company in the United States, possibly in the world, that doesn't invest in search marketing in some way, right? They all have teams, divisions, they have agencies. And so the growth of that field isn't skyrocketing the way it was, when you and I were starting out. But it is also, it's become quite a mature industry. But the compound annual growth rate is not going to be, it's not
No
going to
more
be
way.
like it was. It's not,
Yeah.
it's some small, number above GDP growth instead of 500% year over year or whatever.
Yeah, at least that's a positive. I mean, I know there's a general reputation. There was like a phase there of just, and people probably would still say it, but I think it really was loud in Q4 of like the results are just terrible. But it's almost like more of a Google blame thing than the
Yeah.
practitioners blame for whatever reason.
I mean, I remember when I got into the industry in 2003, 2004, whatever, Wired and all these publications were already writing about, the death of Google. The results are so much worse. They're getting spammier. They're manipulated. Look at whatever it was, right? And you can always find use cases. And so for me, what's important is to look at the data, right? So SparkToro, we buy data from Data, such a clickstream data provider. They have a big panel of, millions of people, and they get to see every URL that the browser visits. And so I just want to know, like, my question to Datos is, well, tell me, on average, did people search Google more in 2024 than they did in 2023? That to me is the simplest way to determine whether Google's results are truly getting worse. Because if a product is getting worse and there's something better out there, people will switch, right? They'll move on to something else. And the answer is no. I'm about to publish on this in a couple of weeks, but we looked, and I think I want to say it's like 11 or 12% growth in queries, average number of queries per user in 24 versus 23. Which, by the way, Ross, this is exactly what Sundar Pichai said in the Google earnings call 2 weeks ago. So, oftentimes I like call that guy out for, most famously, telling fibs in front of Congress a few years ago, right? And I wrote a sort of blog post that was like, hey, if I were the Department of Justice, hold this guy's feet to the fire on these things. And obviously the Google antitrust case did come to pass, and they ended up using and citing some of our research, which is super cool. But my findings this time are, nope, he ain't lying, kids. Like, Google is correct. When they introduced AI overviews, it sure looks like they managed to grow the number of searches per searcher. And so, complain all you want about Google, but the average American, at least, is searching them more than they ever did.
The natural search. That's great data, by the way. I'm looking forward to that report.
I suspect a lot of SEO agencies are going to really appreciate this when we publish it.
The subsequent question, maybe you're addressing it with the data, or you'll get this. So I'll be your first questioner. Is searches are up. I'm curious what clicks to outside websites have changed. Is there anything on that yet? Unclear.
That is not good news. Yeah, not good
Okay.
news at all. So we're going to redo that study again this summer. We did it last summer, but you saw the results. Basically, that here's how to think about it. I think best, which is for every 1,000 searches that happen in Google's ecosystem, about 340 make their way to a non-Google owned website after.
Okay.
So,
and how has that
2/3.
changed? I mean, that definitely sounds low. I forget what that like. Is there a sense of
Yeah.
change
So
there?
years ago, I want to say 2018 or 19, it was about 50-50. Now it's 2/3.
Oh wow, interesting. Yeah, I know the kind of the view I've heard louder is like AI overviews are most consistently being introduced on top funnel topics. Um, so that thesis that I saw, you have a great email that you shared. I'll link to it in the show notes of just the common thought process of more and more. We probably should be saying that traffic's going to be down, but revenue is going to be up. Uh,
Yeah, I
Hypothetically,
think traffic
hopefully.
down, revenue up is the trend of
25.
2025. Like that is where the world is going. And, I kind of think about it this way, which is it's a little bit insane to me to say I do, SEO or search marketing, and my metric for success is visits, rather than I do SEO or search marketing and my metric for success is influence. I want to change the perception, change the minds, introduce my brand in front of people who search. That should be the North Star for anyone who's doing search marketing, right? Someone performs a search. We know that on average, 2/3 of the time, they're going to stay inside the Google ecosystem after that, whether that's, go to YouTube or see a Google image that solves their problem, or get that featured snippet or the AI overview or the instant answer or Google Maps results or Google flight results or Google hotel results, or like Google is trying to be the answer in every single case. Why are you trying to get traffic? You're trying to get traffic because that's how you used to do it, not because that's how you create influence. The way you create influence is you be in those answers. You be at the top of the Google Map result. You be at the top of the Google image result. You be at the top of the YouTube video that someone's going to watch. You be at the top of that AI overview and have your brand mentioned in there. You be in the featured snippet. You want to change minds and influence people and nudge them toward your brand. Your traffic is a byproduct of that, right? And so I think the KPIs are going to have to change. People are going to have to get savvy about this. This is already how everyone thinks about AI tools. It's already how everyone thinks about social media marketing. It's already how everyone thinks about marketing, through content like a podcast.
Yeah.
I don't expect that people are going to listen to your conversation with me and click a link to SparkToro that then says, "Oh, the Content and Conversation podcast with Rand and Ross drove this visitor." Like, what? No, it's not going to happen, right? But do I think that over the next year or two, people who listen to this conversation, when they think, "Man, I really need to know which AI tools are getting more popular with my audience," that they'll go to SparkToro and plug in their website or, describe their audience and then get the answer there? Yeah, I do. Because they'll be like, "Oh yeah, SparkToro can tell me that. I heard that conversation with Rand and Ross." That's influence. It's not traffic. And marketing's job is influence. Like, Ross, when you and I were kids and we watched TV shows, and they'd interrupt the Transformers program to sell you Transformers from Toys R Us. Like, there was no click, right? you didn't go to a website. You waited 6 months until your birthday, and then you went to Toys R Us with your folks, and you were like, "I want Optimus Prime," And Hasbro knew that. Like, they were like, "Yeah, that's why we buy the ad," But
Right.
it's just a different type of investment.
It's going to be interesting. And one of my questions I had for you, if I don't know if there's answer to this, but like that's an attribution issue potentially. That's even louder in many ways. Like, are there solves for? I mean, I guess these tools will increasingly have the task, or tools will have the task of like helping us try to figure that out. But Any ideas for how we can kind of overcome that objection that will be sure to come if it's not already here? Of like, am I actually doing anything? Is search as a channel doing anything productive if I can't measure the non-branded search? Yeah.
My suspicion is that if we fast forward 10 years in the future, there will be a broad understanding from kind of everyone who participates in the marketing universe and ecosystem that the way to measure in 2035 is the same way you measured in 1985,
Hmm.
which was test,
Ask.
invest, measure, lift, right? So you bought a billboard for Coca-Cola on the highway, and you would test whether in a 50-mile radius around that billboard, same store sales, year over year, seasonally adjusted, went up or down, and by how much compared to a demographically similar area where you tested a different billboard and looked at same store sales there. And then you go, okay, this billboard is the winner. We're going to roll that out across this region. And we have found that changing up the billboard every 2 years makes a bigger difference than changing it out every 6 months, whatever it is. That is exactly how a massive amount of marketing investments work. Every Super Bowl ad you see, every airport, billboard placement that you come by, every ad on television or radio or before a movie rolls at the cinema, that's how they're doing it. I don't think the attribution game is going to be, I don't think it's a long-term winner. I think because of privacy policies and privacy laws and regulations, because users are installing browsers that block third-party cookies, because of the untrackability across multiple devices, because of all these massive changes. Ad blockers, of course, getting adopted by almost a third of American users in some way or another. Like, the
Yeah.
trackability of this stuff is just not going to happen. Same thing is true with a ton of platforms. Like, if we did this study on dark social, was it last year or 2 years ago? I think I might have sent you the email about that, Ross. But like, dark social is essentially Slack, LinkedIn, WhatsApp, uh, bunch of I think Mastodon, Facebook Messenger. A ton of these platforms. If they send you a visit, they intentionally remove the referrer, and so you cannot right, like you can't track it. You will not know. And yeah, man,
Yeah.
that's yeah. There you go. Right, exactly that chart.
Makes it two
So
years ago, April of 2 years ago, you shared
yeah,
this. Yeah. It's interesting. I think about it's like my mind goes to SEO strategy of like a company has multi categories. I could kind of sprint on one category and measure the lift of that
that's
potentially.
exactly what you would do, right? And you'll do these micro campaigns, right, where you're like, hey, we're gonna we're gonna make this investment in zero click searches, right, or zero click marketing through search, which means that we're going to try and influence a bunch of these AI overviews and featured snippets and instant answers and results to recommend our brand. And then we're going to see whether that results in more branded search volume and more people clicking on and more people reaching our site over time, and a rise in conversion rate, but not from the searches that we actually rank in. We're just influencing people, which will bring more people, bring a higher caliber of people to us from that. And those investments are going to be, sort of time series A/B type of testing. Um,
Yeah, makes sense.
yeah,
Yeah, it's still tried and true stuff like where did you I guess even people misreport where they found you. I was about to say you could ask
yeah.
them where they found you. Yeah.
The where you found us is real interesting. So we did some tests around this because I also thought that would be the solution, right? And two things. Well, there's a bunch of problems in there. One is no one will accurately be able to tell you these are the 7 or 8 touches that your brand had with me before I bought from you. Just no way. You'll never get it. We all know that multi-touch is a real thing, right? That almost no one ever gets their first exposure to a brand or product and then immediately converts. But the how did you hear about us treats treats that as the only way people can find you. The second problem is people's ability to remember any sort of attribution is terrible. So we tested this with a consumer food product. They basically sell a food product in stores, but also online. They kind of started online, and they were direct to consumer. Now they're sold in stores as well. And basically, they had a how did you hear about us on their website? And I asked them because they were like doing some stuff with SparkToro, and I was like, hey, would you guys be willing to test a theory for me? Could you throw in the names of some popular food influencers who have never mentioned your brand, like never ever talked about you? So it was like, I don't know, Guy Fieri or like, people like that, Martha Stewart. And they put three, I can't remember, 3 or 4 of these influencers on the how did you hear about us? And so many people who filled it out selected those. Like, I think that became one of them, like Martha Stewart or somebody became like the number 2 response. And they were like, oh, got it. This data is garbage. Like it is meaningless. People will they're like, yeah, I've heard of that person and I like them, right? So you could be like, oh yeah, I'm selling B2B software. How'd you hear about us? You put Snoop Dogg on your list. I swear to you, B2B software buyers will be like, damn, did they work with Snoop? Yeah, that's probably where I heard about him. And like a bunch of people will select that one. So just don't treat that as good information. Like, well, it doesn't tell you anything.
Yeah. Probably not horrible to collect it, but don't take it as fact.
Yeah, I mean, I think a reasonable way to treat the how did you hear about us is if you make it an open box and then people type in something and you go look and you're like, oh man, that's super cool. Whatever, this YouTuber, this podcast, this channel, like was mentioned by a few people. You know what it's great for? It's great for going back to that person and being like, hey, it was really meaningful when you talked about us. Thank you so much. We're going to send you some free product. Do you want to do something together? Like maybe we do a podcast together in the future. Awesome for that. Like that's a great use case for how did you hear about us? But to think that you're getting attribution that you can use to measure your marketing.
Yeah, agreed. And we have that drop down in our drop down. And one of the core problems we always have is people will say referral from friend, and then we don't know what friend it is. And it's kind of an awkward flow. They also sometimes don't respond when we ask them who that friend is. So maybe we should just open up that prompt. And one of the benefits of AI tools is I'm sure it could still aggregate and create categories instantly with that data in the same way. So interesting for sure. So on the SparkToro front, one thing love about the tool, I mean, you have so many just places of influence, podcast, website, Reddit, all of those things, social networks. Like as a user of the tool, how should I think about prioritization? Or is there a way to think about that? Like if I'm starting square one, like how do I know I should go to podcasts? Should I? And vice versa.
Yeah, I think that's a super fair question. And unfortunately, this is a little bit one of the challenges of, I think, how we present the data, which is by channel, right? So we sort of assume, hey, if someone's coming to SparkToro and they want to know their audience's sources of influence, very often they want to dig into one thing in particular. Like they know that, I don't know, Reddit is super influential, so they want to know which subreddits they should subscribe to and pay attention to and listen to and participate in, which is a very good use case. But what we don't tell you is, on a relative scale, what percent of your audience is paying attention to Reddit versus subscribing to YouTube channels or listening to podcasts about this topic. And in fairness to us, that data is really, really difficult to know. Once we go into a channel, we can identify that this subreddit is much more influential than this other one with this audience. But comparing Reddit to Google searches or comparing podcasts to YouTube channels or comparing, social networks against search, that is considerably more difficult. We're starting to do it. There's this new part of SparkToro called Search and AI tools, where we look at the percent, basically the affinity that the audience you searched for has with visitation and use of a particular website. And that gives us the ability to say, oh, ChatGPT is much less influential with your audience than it is with the average American internet user, or the inverse. We can do that with, Kaggy and Gemini and Google.com and Bing and YouTube and right, all these like discovery platforms, Amazon. So we can tell you, people who are searching for whatever paper towels, Amazon is way bigger than it is on average with most American users. That's not a big surprise, right? I think like you probably know that. But long term, yeah, Ross, I think it'd be really great for us to be able to sort of provide you with this like one visual graphic right at the top that says, we think these channels are significantly influential among your audience, and sort of here's how much.
Yeah, makes sense. Very, very hard problem. I mean, there's so much helpful, actionable information in this. So,
well, I'll tell you. I mean, the biggest problem with this is like, let's say, let's go back to the food brand, right? So, like, someone is searching for. I'm going to change up what the actual food product was because I don't have permission to share the brand name with this. I didn't ask them for that.
GuyFieri.com.
Yeah, right. Spicy. But let's say you want to buy pasta, right? So you're looking for home chefs and cooks who are like, they want to buy fancy pasta online. Like they don't want the $2 the Checo or Barilla or whatever. They're looking for like, ooh, I want my fancy brands. Personally, there's a brand that I love that's called Benedetto Cavalieri. And it's like $10 for a thing of spaghetti, instead of like $2. It's flipping great spaghetti. Like it's really, really great spaghetti. So if you're helping out Benedetto Cavalieri, like you will see, for example, when you search for that audience and we look in our data set, we might see that tons of those people are visiting YouTube. But are they visiting YouTube specifically to learn about spaghetti brands? How do we know that?
Oh, yeah.
That is the really difficult part. So we can say this audience visits YouTube this much, unless we were able to, I think what we would have to do is like index every YouTube channel, look at the number of subscribers, look at the number of views per video, and then try and reverse out based on that, do some fancy math to figure that out. That's a tough nut to crack. Even tougher in podcasts where there's less information about, listenership, and engagement.
Makes sense. Yeah, agreed. Makes sense. Yeah, I mean, regardless, is super helpful. I mean, I think just digging into it, as you mentioned, kind of looking at YouTube data, you could probably infer some of this, look at the actual search volume data, and have a good start. But the fact that you're doing it at all is going to be fruitful. I mean, honestly, good.
We're as close to an answer as you can get right now from a tool that I'm aware of. You can do similar things with SimilarWeb, and I like their product a lot. They're just extremely expensive. So like, if you have a big budget, I think SimilarWeb is great for this. But if you're like, hey, I got $50 a month or $150 a month or something, like, I think SparkToro might be the only way that you can start to get that kind of data. It's not fully perfect, but maybe someday in the future we can start to make those inferences and connect all that up to tell you how influential a particular channel is, not just what's the most influential thing in a given channel.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways it's interesting. I mean, I'm not saying this is like a tidal wave, but like we use the tool for sure for like initial discovery for our clients, and as you mentioned, I just want to be transparent. Like I am an investor in SparkToro, so I should say that more loudly. But we for a while just would use it there, and honestly, sometimes the team, I don't know if they would or not. It just kind of depends on their use case. Yeah. As we're going more direction of like organic growth, and like we want to be actually driving brand value and actual influence, as you state, like we're like more concretely put it into the process of like, we need to figure out who the influencers in these verticals are. How do we find distribution for our content outside of search itself? And the tool itself is great for that. That otherwise just relying solely on search to do that would be not nearly as fruitful or diversified in a
Right.
long-term world. So
Yeah, and I
that's
think about this, that diversification, I think, you talked about your agency sort of being, hey, our roots are in search. Like that's where we started. That's what we help people with. But I think that there is a real need in the long-term future for every agency, every marketer, every team, every company to be thinking hard about the diversification of their marketing to many of these different channels, even if they don't send traffic, because that's where influence happens. We have this chart. I think there's like two charts that I want to show to every human being who ever works in marketing or thinks about it, every CEO. One is essentially showing these are sources of traffic on the internet. So I did this last year with Datos. I basically said, hey, I want you to tell me which sites send traffic to which other ones. And remember, they're not, because they see every URL visited in a browser, they're not subject to the same, privacy and ad blocker and lack of attribution problems that your analytics are. So they can say, this visitor came from TikTok and went to your site, even though TikTok removes the referral string. Cool. Great. What Datos showed us is that Google and search more broadly, so like including DuckDuckGo and Bing and Yahoo and all the other ones, is 75% of all traffic referrals. So if you want traffic, you're stuck with search. The next like 10,000 most popular sites on the web send comparatively nothing, right?
yeah.
And the biggest ones of those, by the way, are like YouTube and Facebook and Reddit and Instagram and places that are very hard to get scalable traffic from. And I'm sure this won't surprise you at all. Most of the traffic that Facebook sends out goes to Instagram or Threads. Most of the traffic that YouTube sends out goes to another Google property or Alphabet owned property. Like,
yeah.
So you get the idea. If you want traffic, you are stuck with search. But then there's another graph that I asked them to create. I was like, hey, wait a minute. Can you tell me time spent and number of visits? And then I categorized all of those sites. I hand categorized the top 500 or something because I didn't want to rely on an AI, even though they're pretty good at that.
Yeah.
So I hand categorized those. And if you look, the most time spent, no surprise, is on social networks. Time spent in visits is social networks. Then it's like news and media information. Then it's like productivity tools like your Gmail and calendar and Slack and all those, right? All those things that like people are in all day for their work purposes or school or whatever. And search is the fifth most visited and engaged with category. So the fifth most visited category sends all the traffic. But if you are not paying attention to your sources of influence, you're going to miss out on those top four and all the other ones. And I think this dichotomy, this comparison, when it really sinks in for people, they have that head smacking moment of, oh my God, I've been doing last click attribution on everything. And that's why I invest exclusively in or focus exclusively on search, because that's the only channel that tells me when it sends the traffic.
Yeah, love that. Just that time is just directly connected to the influence of that potentially on your buyer. That
Yeah, I mean,
maybe
like
not
when
be.
someone goes and searches for, I bet about after this podcast, some number of our listeners today are going to go search for spaghetti, right? They're going to go look for Benedetto Cavalieri spaghetti, which, and
Hard to spell, but
hard to spell. Yeah, Benedetto, Benedetto. So they're going to go do that search in Google, and Benedetto Cavalieri will have no flippin' idea why that those searches spiked up, right? And why a few people came and, whatever, bought them or looked for their brand in stores, whatever it is. And there's no way for them to tell that, oh, this was through podcast influence. And if they're paying attention to their attribution, they're going to spend more money on Google, right? The people who listen and search for that are going to make the pasta maker think that Google is a channel that should be invested in. That's not where the demand came from, bro.
Yeah, yeah.
Like,
It came. They should be they should be sponsoring this podcast. That's the
right?
lesson,
Yeah.
I think.
Send me some pasta. So I can put it in my
I
background.
know. Yeah, I know what I'm googling after this. But well, Rand, this has been great. Some good like thought nuggets, like things to think about generally. But what about
Yeah,
like
yeah.
we started in the past year. Like, are we going to see Rand Fishkin do SEO again, or is this just like done for?
Gosh, it seems quite unlikely to me. So, one of the things that I think is so strange is nobody searches for the problem SparkToro solves. So there's 100 times more searches for SparkToro than there is for audience research software. Like,
Yeah,
it doesn't even show on Google Trends. Like, that's how low it is. And I think the reality is that I technically I do some SEO kinds of things, right? Um, I end up getting links. I end up getting references. My content ends up appearing in Google, especially Google Images. We're not good at ranking in Google search. Like, whenever we publish research, Search Engine Land and Search Engine Journal and a bunch of other like Media Post and other marketing institutions, they publish about our research and they outrank us always. And so, like, Google will always show you a bunch of stuff. If you search for our research, you'll find a bunch of these other ones. And I don't worry too much about that. Like, my goal has been reached. My goal was to influence people, to get them to understand the space and those kinds of things. I have no problem with SEO. I still think it's a cool tactic. I obviously have tons of friends in that industry. I still
yeah,
speak at some SEO conferences sometimes, all that kind of stuff. But my thinking on where marketing is going is like, gosh, it's got to be bigger than this, right? And so what I want to tell SEOs. Mike King invited me to the New York, what's it called? SEO Week in New York.
SEO week, I'll be there.
Oh yeah, cool, great. Yeah, we should catch up.
Yeah,
And he was like, hey, I want you to come. And I said, I don't really talk about SEO. Like, are you comfortable with me saying, I think you should be taking the skills that you have in SEO and broadening them. Like, you are more than an
and
SEO,
yeah.
and you should be thinking about those things. Like, if I were going to put bets on what's going to rise in the future, it's PR, man. I think PR is the big thing that people need to invest in. How do I get my brand into all these places where people pay attention? And that's what powers AI results. Like, you think about what goes into a large language model. If I want SparkToro to be the first thing that comes up in ChatGPT's answer, Gemini's answer, Perplexity's answer, when someone prompts them for, hey, how do I do audience research? Or what are good audience research tools? Then I better make sure that SparkToro appears very frequently on the web in trusted publications that these places are going to index for their model next to audience research tool, audience research software, audience research as the phrase. Like, that co-occurrence in those documents is what's going to make the difference. How do you do that? PR.
Yeah, I agree. We have benefit. I mean, we were talking before the call, like, we expect to be up this year. We were up last year. A lot of that demand is for digital PR. And increasingly, when I say digital PR, I'm with you and bullish on, like, even how we're doing that. We've done it less in the traditional, like, link bait space of, like,
Yeah.
it should be going traditional in our approach.
Plus, it's kind of beautiful.
Sure.
Like, I remember what it was like pitching people for links. It was brutal, like, awful. Your success rates were so low. Nobody wants to add a link, blah, blah. But with generative AI, you don't need a link. They don't care about links. Links are kind of useless to them. It's just word usage and getting your brand, pitching for a story about something interesting you've done 100 times easier.
Yeah.
way
pasta
better
mentions.
success rates.
Well, thank you, Rand. This has been great. Yeah, love SparkToro, bias, but
Uh,
great tool. Spark
yeah,
Together.
thanks,
We didn't
man.
get a chance to talk about it, but a great conference coming up in October. What's the date in October?
Yep, October in Seattle. It's gonna be like a day and a half this time. We have like a training day, SparkToro training day beforehand, and Amanda's running that process with Charlene
Great.
Ditch,
Nice.
who started and ran MozCon with me back when I
Oh,
was at
cool.
Moz. So that's
Nice.
really cool. And yeah, that should be a great event. Again, last year was sold out. I expect this year will be sold out too. I think we've already sold about 70 or 80 tickets. So
Nice. Yeah, I had a great time last year. Definitely recommend it. So check it out. Google SparkToro. Got the brand search part of SEO going,
yeah,
if not
there
anything
you go.
else.
Yeah, I'll look for searches for Spark Together, searches
After
for
this
Benedict
attribution, then
Cavalieri.
you'll start pitching me to be back here.
Awesome. Awesome.
All right. Thank you, Rand.